I'm delighted to be here representing what the British call the British Isles, what we like to call the Atlantic Archipelago. Established and emerging European political figures understood the significance of the great cataclysm of 1914 to 18. Benito Mussolini, one of his first major political beneficiaries, described the ensuing chaos in El Popolo d'Italia. The whole earth trembles. All continents are riven by the same crisis. There is not a single part of the planet which is not shaken by the cyclone. In old Europe, men disappear, systems break, and institutions collapse. After the same war, the final dissection of four empires, the redistribution of imperial spoils, and the root and branch transformation of the European polity, Britain confronted a more immediate and age-old problem. Winston Churchill described her conundrum in classic British colonial terms. Then came the Great War. Every institution almost in the world was strained. Great empires have been overturned. The whole map of Europe has changed. The position of countries has been violently altered. The modes of thought of men, he didn't mention women obviously, the whole outlook on affairs, the grouping of parties, all have encountered violent and tremendous change in the deluge of the world. But as the deluge subsides and the waters fall short, we see the dreary steeples of Fermanagh and Tyrone emerging once again. The integrity of their core is one of the few institutions that have not been unaltered in the cataclysm. That says a lot for the persistency with which Irishmen on the other side or the other are able to pursue their controversies. However, as Joe Lee rightly points out, there was nothing unique about Fermanagh and Tyrone. All that happened was that the borders were revised in Central and Eastern Europe in favour of smaller states. This was precisely what did not happen in Fermanagh and Tyrone. As a subject people of one of Europe's two victorious empires, the Irish found themselves excluded from among those who clamoured at the Paris Peace Conference. Inspired in part by high Wilsonian rhetoric of freedom for small nations, national self-determination, and making the world safe for democracy, her newly constituted Dáil, or Parliament, fought an election, set up a rival government to Britain, and immediately dispatched delegates to Versailles. The Irish-American writer Michael J. O'Brien's Hidden Phases of American History, Ireland's part in America's Struggle for Liberty, 1919, reminded the US President, the ultimate arbiter of the post-war settlement, of America's debt to Ireland and Ireland's rightful place among emancipated nations. There is every reason to hope that the great-hearted American people will pay the debt their country owes to Ireland for the part played by her sons in the achievement of our liberty. Our President has declared that small nationalities have the right to self-determination and that this question should be settled at the Peace Conference. It does not mean to bring freedom to the Poles alone, nor restore freedom to the Serbs alone, but to bring freedom to all oppressed peoples, to all downtrodden nations. While Ireland, in her present state, stands festering like a great sword in the side of England, there can be no security for England or for Europe. Justice demands that the Irish should have the same rights given to her as that which is given to the other small nations of Europe. However, Irish America would leave nothing to chance. Having organised and bankrolled the 1916 rebellion and financed the provisional government's war with Britain, they preempted the latter by gathering in Congress and electing a commission to represent Ireland at Versailles. To that end, they deployed their formidable political lobby in the US Senate, Congress and the State Department, a process which is catalogued in great detail in the print media on both sides of the Atlantic. Thus, as well as explaining recent failed states and the political collapse in the Middle East and Maghreb, and the consequential relentless trail of tears across southern and central Europe, a revisit to the Paris Peace Conference on this centenary can proffer possible lessons and pointers for the ongoing protracted Brexit negotiations. This is not a lecture to the dead or the living, you could be dead at the end of the book, merely to see if its diplomatic lessons and mistakes can inform us on Brexit and the future of the EU and indeed the UK. The tables have most certainly turned in 100 years. In 1919, an embryonic, cash-strapped Irish provisional government found itself at war with the British Empire. Its peace delegation depended on the good offices of Irish America to gain access to the US President, and neither he nor the ailing French Premier Georges Clemenceau had any wish to disoblige their British allies. Prime Minister David Lloyd George, the Welsh wizard and subsequently evil genius of the Anglo-Irish treaty negotiations, headed a formidable British delegation that determined, both in 1919 and 1921, to keep Ireland in the Empire at all costs. However, Theresa May is no Lloyd George, and the Empire has long gone, in spite of Brexit pseudo-imperial fantasies. Besides, Mrs May presides over a deeply divided union and polity, a thoroughly hapless cabinet, and heads a weak, divided minority government enthralled to the hardline, hard Brexit Democratic Unionist Party. During the height of the Irish Home Rule crisis of 1914, Andrew Bonar Law, the leader of the Tory opposition, mocked Prime Minister Asquith's support for Irish Home Rule. Pointing to John Redmond, the Irish national leader in Westminster, he exclaimed, "There sits your conscience," to which Asquith replied, pointing to Sir Edward Carson, leader of Irish Unionism, "And there sits yours." For the first time in 100 years, however, there is not one Irish nationalist MP in the British House of Commons. The 7 Sinn Féin MPs elected to Westminster in Theresa May's last disastrous general election are Republicans who will neither take an oath of allegiance to Queen Elizabeth II or take their seats in Parliament. Thus, the Democratic Unionist Party keep the British Prime Minister in power, and they are increasingly calling the shots in Westminster. Meanwhile, Northern Ireland has entered the Guinness Book of Records for being without a Parliament for over 500 days, despite being the region of the UK which voted overwhelmingly against Brexit and which is set to suffer its worst economic and political fallout. In contrast, the Irish Republic is relatively stable, has largely recovered from the 2008 banking crisis, and is wholly united on the Brexit issue. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and Taoiseach Simon Coveney lead a relatively secure, functioning coalition comprising the Republic's 2 largest political parties, and they can depend on little politicking from Sinn Féin, Ireland's largest all-Ireland party, on this issue. Moreover, not one deputy in Dáil Éireann supports Irexit, I can't even say it. Thus, Varadkar's position has overwhelming support across the island. His government has cultivated friends in Europe and operates on the principle of hoping for the best and planning for the worst. As ever, the Irish-American dimension remains crucial, but economics has largely eclipsed politics as the major consideration, especially since Ireland joined the EEC in 1973. Of course, history, politics and culture dictate that a Janus-headed Ireland invariably flirts between America and Europe. Berlin, to use a well-hackneyed analogy. It is important to note, however, a fact lost on our Brexit here, friends, that both the US and the EU, in that order, are now more important to the Irish economy than the UK, which accounted for a massive 70% of Irish exports when we joined together in 1973. However, Ireland and the UK, and particularly Northern Ireland's economies, could not be more intertwined along a disputed 300-mile border which divides rivers, lakes, fields, and even houses. As ex-Prime Minister David Cameron pointed out in the aftermath of the Irish Republic's economic implosion in 2008, the UK does more trade with Ireland than with Russia, India, Brazil, and China combined. The Irish-American lobby has changed too in the last 100 years, but it is no less important for that. In 1919, the Democrat President Woodrow Wilson despised these hyphenated Americans who ultimately joined the Republicans to vote down the Paris Peace Settlement in Congress. Tammany Hall, the legendary Irish democratic political machine, has largely disappeared, although the four horsemen who personified the golden age of American consensus politics in the 1980s would play a crucial role in engaging the Reagan and Clinton White Houses in the peace process and brokering the Good Friday Agreement, which is now something of an Irish potato in the Brexit stew. Since 1919, Irish America has become more white, to use Noel Ignatieff's classical metaphor. They moved to the suburbs, became middle class and Republican, and had voted in mass for Reagan, Bush, and most recently Donald J. Trump. The Walshes, Dunns, and Flynns, who championed Ireland's cause in Paris, are the Kellys, Flynns, Spicers, Conways, and Bannons who surround, or used to surround, an isolationist president who wishes to make America great again, despises the EU, and is keen to undercut Ireland's low corporation tax and bring American multinationals back to the homeland. Here I forsake history for the chopping waters of pure conjecture, so I hope you'll indulge me. Nearly 100 years after the Paris Peace Conference, 1919, and the subsequent Anglo-Irish Treaty, 1920, that partitioned Ireland, its composite complex borders have re-emerged in the context of Brexit and at a crucial moment in the EU's history. Lloyd George, Clemenceau and Wilson have conceded the political stage to May, Macron, Merkel, Varadkar and Verhofstadt. Similarly, the composite monarchies and empires of the early 20th century have been replaced by common markets, global free trade agreements, international organizations, and political confederations. However, the hitherto stable relationships and friendships between neighbours, economic dependents, and political partners are once again in flux. The borders, cultural insecurities, identities, immigrants, sovereignties, states, and trade issues of the 20th century are coming home to roost in a less violent but no less real way than in the blood-soaked composite colonial constructs of the Levant and Maghreb. Security fencing may have replaced Churchill's Iron Curtain, but his dreary steeples have re-emerged from the mists with a vengeance. This time, however, Ireland is at the table and Britain seemingly clamours at Europe's gates. The continent and context has changed beyond recognition, but this particular problem remains seemingly intractable. The small republic's willingness to take a bullet for the euro, pay the gambling debts of European bankers since 2008, and take the Troika's hard medicine seem to have paid off, and being exonerated by the centrality of our border in the EU's blueprint for Brexit. The choreography and mood and music sound good, but the devil will ultimately be in the detail. Still, Ireland has come a long way in 100 years since its peace delegation shivered outside the Palace of Versailles on a cold November in 1919. However, goodwill and photo ops would not wish away a hard boy. Breaking down physical and psychological borders has been central to the European project. She needs to deliver for Ireland and Europe on this key issue. As Donald Tusk put it, Ní Neart or Curlachéile, there is no strength without unity, and this will be put to the test in the coming years. For all its faults, and it has many, the EEC-EU has been a blessing for the continent, a point lost both among the Brexiteers and Remainers who fumbled in the poet Yeats's greasy tale during the referendum. When Ireland joined with the UK in 1973, fascist dictators ruled Spain and Portugal. Greece, the cradle of democracy, groaned under army rule. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Romania and the Baltic states comprised Soviet satellites, and crucially, Northern Ireland had descended into a nasty, confessional colonial conflict, depending on one's perspective, which poisoned British-Irish relations and threatened to overwhelm the Republic. European soft power played an important role in ending these repressive, undemocratic regimes. It brought Ireland and the UK together on a neutral venue and transformed power relations between both countries, whether or not Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg would be prepared to concede that point. Lord Palmerston, arguably Britain's worst Prime Minister before David Cameron and Theresa May, famously quipped that Britain does not have allies, she has interests. Crucially, this applies in both Brussels and Westminster. There are few certainties in Irish and British history, but I will proffer one. The Tory party will always betray Irish unionists, as evidenced by Lord Randolph Churchill, Winston's father, Andrew Bonar Law, Winston Churchill, Ted Heath, Margaret Thatcher and John Major. Expect a sellout on a border down the Irish Sea and an ultimatum from Mrs May to the DUP of bag me, sack me and put Jeremy Corbyn into 10 Downing Street. And you'll be happy. In conclusion, 100 years ago this year, Britain imposed partition as a stopgap solution to the Irish problem, a problem which she had, of course, created. Europe did not interfere. The EU's solution to the seemingly intractable border impasse, and the only logical solution in this speaker's humble opinion, is economic reunification. Go to